what is the difference between basically a great artist creating for a purpose versus most artists who just kind of wanted just to do it.
Well, I mean, a great artist is going to usually be able to see deeper. He's going to have more skill, and even if a great artist is someone who maybe doesn't have uh, a good mind or a good whatever, someone like a Ryan or Maria Rilke, they may have enough skill that it doesn't matter because they may be able to tap into something intuitively that someone uh, who isn't doesn't. Someone like a Donald Hall, for example, who's a bad poet. He's not the worst poet in the world, but he's a bad poet. Could write for 1,000 years, and he's never going to get to anything of any depth. Someone like a Rilke, who might have been a real scumbag and whatnot, can get to something deeper because his mind will peer deeper, and even if he doesn't necessarily hone in on something uh, in a conscious way, his unconscious or his subconscious will probably bring something to the surface. And just by the elucidation of words, the words carry meaning and import too. So as he's writing something, he's going to uh, touch upon usually something probably of depth. I know, for example, when I've written poems and when I ran poetry groups or went to poetry groups, one of the things I always said to people was play with words. Because when you play with words, you're also playing with ideas. And this is something people, especially modern politically correct, multicultural approaches to art, people want to just say something. I've got things to say. I've got ideas about Bruce Jenner and homosexuality. I got ideas about race and why cops are killing black men all over the country. I'm against animal testing. I'm against abortion. I'm against nuclear war. I got things to say. But how you say them is as important or more important than what you're going to say because if all you're going to do is say that I'm for or against this, it becomes a bumper sticker if you don't say it well. And you can get anyone to write a bumper sticker, but if but an artist that has some depth may be wanting to say the same thing very directly, but is going to be able to say it in a way that will, even if they're not conscious of it, bring something to it. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing these interviews, for example, is that some people are not good at uh, at saying things or understanding things unless it's said directly. And so I can write all the great poems I want. I can write all the great books or novels or short stories. I can write great reviews or great essays. But some people need to be told these things straightforward, like me looking into the camera and saying, A, B, and C. And that'll get them more directly. And that's one of the reasons I want to do these interviews. But art, there are going to be people that will not listen or don't care about such a direct method of communication. That's where art comes in. You can be reading something about Moby Dick, and it might stir something about your own desires to move on from, say, living with your parents and needing to get out and explore the world. Um, and so that's what art does, and art uh, has that power that no other form of communication does. That's why it is the highest form of communication. Writing, in particular, is the highest form of general art because you're basically talking about a medium with some some other form of scribbling on it. These things, we can recognize A, B, C, or D. We can recognize one, two, three, plus, minus sign, but these are basically just scribblings that, unless you know and have learned that particular, they're utterly meaningless. But you put these things onto a medium, and to understand that. And that's a thing that a lot of people don't get, and that's what I meant when I said writing is ideas. And so you basically, eyes developed something like 600 million years ago, the first known eyes, maybe even over a billion years ago. But the first uh, eyes in multicellular animals that are vaguely similar to ours developed 600 million years ago. So I can look, if I take off my eyeglasses, if my eyes were any good, I can look at something and I can get a stimulus. if I'm looking at a Rembrandt painting, for example, and Rembrandt's one of the great portrait artists, and you can look at a self-portrait Rembrandt did of himself, and you can see just the way he uses paint or something, you get a look that he may have had in 1683, and you don't know what it is about, but you understand that man to a certain degree. That's communication at the speed of light. I'm listening to music. Music is something that doesn't have much intellectual content, but it emotionally seeps into it. You need intellect to create music, but not to enjoy it. Uh, and so there you're getting the oral sensation or the visual sensation. But language is different. It's the closest thing to telepathy because it's totally abstract. It's an abstract medium with something abstract on it that can contain something far greater than just, say, listening to even Mozart or Beethoven, or if you like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. You can listen to a great song, but it's only going to take you so far. And uh, and the highest of the art forms, and the highest of writing, is poetry, because poetry packs the most with the least, basically. You don't have to even have a strong narrative in a poem. You can have a 3, 4, 5 line poem, a haiku, 3 lines, 17 syllables, and if it's really good enough, you can get an image or a moment. There's a famous poem, I think it's by Tu Fu, that's only maybe about 4 lines, or I guess uh, the equivalent of lines if you translate it from Chinese. And it's basically someone 12, 1300 years ago, whenever he lived, and he's talking about watching the armies come back from a battle. And I forget the actual phrasing of it, and I don't know if the poem even had a name, but it's a very modern poem in that there's no rhyme either in the original Chinese or in the translations, but it's just watching the sort of the defeated men coming home from like the top of the hill, and they're coming back in battle. And I forget what the comment is, but you're right there 12, 1300 years ago, and that'll pack as much a punch as the visual sensation of looking at a Rembrandt will, or of listening to some great sonata by someone, Verdi, or something. So
I
that
believe, I believe in that poem he sort of looks down and he compares it to I guess some sort of insects that he sees creating homes in a field or something like that. I
Yes,
think I think that was
yeah,
the image.
yeah, yeah, and again, it's a very modern image because at the time in the West, this was even probably pre-Beowulf, and so we in the West we were having skulls and this and that, and it was just the usual bullshit. But anyway, that's a roundabout answer to your question.